In a packed courtroom, a mother walks in, not in a suit but in scrubs. Her sneakers are worn from a grueling 12-hour shift, and her hair is pulled back in a messy bun. But what she carries isn't just fatigue. It's a story of sacrifice. Danielle. Hart came straight from the ER to fight for her children's custody. What happened next? It left everyone stunned. Stick around to find out how this nurse's bravery changed the game, and make sure to hit that subscribe button for more inspiring stories. As Danielle Hart sat at the front of the courtroom, the room buzzed with the usual sounds of rustling papers and murmured conversations. But in the midst of it all, her scrubs, stained with the remnants of a night's work, stood out like a flashing red warning light. It wasn't just the worn sneakers or her unkempt hair. No, it was the audacity of her very presence that seemed to make people uneasy. How dare she show up in scrubs to something as serious as a child custody hearing? Didn't she know this was court? Didn't she know the expectations? She didn't have time to think about that. The words that had brought her here were too heavy, the stakes too high. Her ex-husband, Mark, had hired a slick lawyer and was trying to paint her as unstable, as someone who couldn't provide a proper home for their 2 kids. But Danielle knew the truth. She had spent the night saving lives in the ER, running trauma codes, comforting families, pulling strangers back from the edge of death. And yet here she was in a courtroom, fighting for the most important thing in her life, her children. As the judge, Judge Lenora Barron, glanced up from her bench, Danielle felt a chill crawl up her spine. The courtroom fell silent. All eyes turned to her. The judge's gaze lingered on Danielle's scrubs, then flicked up to meet her eyes, a look of disdain forming on her face. "Miss Hart," the judge's voice was sharp, like a slap to the face. "Are you under the impression this is a hospital?" Her tone was mocking, almost condescending, as if the very sight of Danielle in her work clothes was an affront to the dignity of the court. Danielle's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't how she had imagined it going, but she couldn't back down now. She swallowed the lump in her throat, squared her shoulders, and met the judge's gaze. "No, Your Honor," she said, her voice steady despite the rising tide of emotions in her chest. "I just finished a shift. I came straight here." Judge Barron raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a disapproving frown. "This is a courtroom, not a break room. You are presenting yourself in front of this court for a serious case, and you show up in what amounts to pajamas." Danielle's lawyer, Matt Listister, opened his mouth to object, but the judge cut him off before he could speak. "Save it, Miss Hart," the judge said, her voice dripping with scorn. "You may be trying to fight for your children, but you can't even bother to dress like a respectable parent." The words cut deep, but Danielle didn't flinch. She sat up straighter in her chair, the weight of her exhaustion pressing down on her, but also pushing her forward. She wasn't going to shrink into the background, not now, not when it mattered most. With a deep breath, Danielle stood, her eyes never leaving the judge's. She felt the eyes of the courtroom on her, some curious, some judgmental, others simply uncomfortable, but she didn't care. This was her truth. And in that moment, she wasn't about to apologize for it. "Your Honor," she said, her voice low but unwavering, "these pajamas," she gestured to her scrubs, "still have blood on them." There was a beat of silence. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. "It's not mine," she continued. "It belongs to a 7-year-old I helped bring back from cardiac arrest at 4:17 this morning. I didn't have time to change. I had time to choose, save a life, or be 5 minutes late to change for you." The words hung in the air like a punch, sharp and unforgiving. Danielle stood there, her heart pounding in her chest, but she didn't break. She looked directly at the judge, her eyes burning with something fierce, something that could never be dismissed by an insult or a comment. The room was frozen. "Judge." Barron's lips parted, but no words came. The murmur that rippled through the courtroom wasn't just from shock. It was the raw power of truth. The truth that Danielle had just laid bare in front of them all. She wasn't just a nurse. She was a mother, a fighter, and she wasn't about to let anyone belittle the sacrifices she made to keep her family together. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of the judge's gavel slamming down with a force that made everyone jump. "This is not a stage for dramatics, Miss Hart," Judge Barron finally said, her voice shaky. Danielle tilted her head slightly, not in defiance, but in quiet strength. "No, ma'am, it's a courtroom, and I respect it enough to show up, even if it meant not changing out of what I wore to save someone's son." And just like that, the tide began to turn. The courtroom had been one thing a moment ago, a place where appearances and decorum were everything. But now, with one woman's unflinching stand, it had shifted. The rules of the room, the cold expectations that had filled the space, now felt insignificant in the face of a real, raw truth. Danielle's voice hadn't been loud, it hadn't been dramatic, but in that moment, it was all the room could hear. Her words cut through the walls of the courtroom, reverberating in every corner, making each person present take stock of what mattered, what truly mattered. Not appearances, not the labels we wear, but the sacrifices we make when no one is watching, the life we choose to live, even when the world expects us to be something else. The judge's gavel slammed again, but this time, it felt like a mere echo in comparison to the weight of Danielle's words. As Danielle stood her ground in the courtroom, the tension in the room was palpable. Her words, though calm and deliberate, had struck at the very core of everyone present. But in the hallway just outside the courtroom, a different story was unfolding, one that would add an unexpected layer to this already explosive moment. Tina, Danielle's neighbor, had been sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom, her hands wringing nervously in her lap. She wasn't there as a witness. She wasn't even a character in the case. But she had been asked by Danielle to come, to show support, to be there for the woman who had always been there for her. Danielle had been the one to lend her a cup of sugar when she had run out, to help her with the kids when Tina was stuck, at work late, and to always offer a smile when the world felt a little too heavy. Tina had watched, almost with disbelief, as Danielle, standing alone in her scrubs, faced down a judge who seemed more concerned with appearances than the life-saving work Danielle did every day. She had felt a pang of embarrassment at first, embarrassed for Danielle, embarrassed for the situation. But as Danielle spoke, Tina felt her heart swell with admiration. What had started as discomfort turned into awe. Now, sitting in the hallway, Tina's thoughts were in a whirlwind. She wasn't supposed to be involved in this. She wasn't a part of the case, wasn't even supposed to be seen. But she couldn't shake the feeling that everything in her life had led her to this moment. She had seen Danielle in action many times before, putting her own needs aside for others, especially her children. But seeing Danielle stand there, so vulnerable, yet so strong, had left a mark on her that would never fade. Tina's thoughts were interrupted by the soft sound of footsteps behind her. She turned and saw Officer Jake, a local cop who lived 2 houses down. They had been friends for years, sharing the kind of neighborly bond that only comes from living in the same neighborhood. For decades, he had known Danielle well, seen her at her lowest points, after her divorce, after long shifts at the hospital, when she was just trying to keep it together. Is she okay?" Officer Jake asked, sitting down next to Tina, his brow furrowed with concern. He had seen everything, the trials that people went through, the injustices, the victories. But something about this case, about Danielle's fight, felt different. He could see the weight of it in her eyes, the exhaustion in her voice. This wasn't just about custody, it was about survival. Tina shook her head, wiping a tear that had escaped despite her best efforts to stay composed. "She's always been like that. Always giving, always fighting for everyone else, but I never realized how much she's been through, how much she's carried." Jake looked at her, his lips tight with understanding. "She's one hell of a woman, Tina. But today I think she showed the whole world who she really is. Not just a nurse, not just a mother, but a person who gives everything and doesn't ask for anything in return." Tina nodded, her eyes fixed on the courtroom door. But does anyone really see it? Does anyone really understand what it means to sacrifice like she does? It's one thing to go to work every day and save lives, but what happens when you're the one who needs saving? Jake's eyes softened. You know, I've seen her go through so much. After her divorce, after the sleepless nights with the kids. But I've never seen her break. She just keeps going no matter what. Maybe that's why this feels different. Maybe it's because she's never asked for anything. But maybe, just maybe, now is her time. Tina's voice quivered as she spoke. Kirini here, do you think she's going to win? I mean, the judge, the way she talked to her. It was like she was treating her like she was beneath her. Like her job wasn't real. Jake paused, looking back toward the courtroom, his expression hardening. I think the judge is the one who's going to learn something today. Danielle has more integrity in her little finger than most people have in their entire bodies. And I think that's what's going to win this. The truth. It's like she said. She's not here to impress anyone. She's here to fight for her kids, and that's the truth that matters. Tina's heart raced as she thought about the weight of those words. The truth. She had always known that about Danielle, that what you saw was what you got. There was no pretense, no facade. What you saw was raw, real, and unwavering. But seeing it on display like this, watching her stand her ground in front of the judge, Tina realized just how strong her friend truly was. As the door to the courtroom opened and Danielle's lawyer stepped out, Tina and Jake both stood up. Their hearts were in their throats. They had no idea what was going to happen next, but they knew one thing for sure. Danielle had changed something today, and no matter the outcome, she had already won. Tina placed a hand on Jake's arm, her voice barely above a whisper. Whatever happens, she deserves to be seen, to be heard. Jake gave a quiet nod. She already is, Tina. She already is. In that moment, as they waited for the final verdict, both Tina and Jake knew that the court had witnessed something far more powerful than just a fight for custody. They had witnessed a woman who had faced every challenge life could throw at her, and who still stood tall, scrubs, blood, exhaustion, and all. And that, in their eyes, was worth more than any legal victory. The public's eye, the tension in the courtroom seemed to stretch, holding its breath as Danielle stood there, unwavering in front of Judge Barron. Her words had struck with such force, shaking the very foundation of the courtroom, but now, outside, the sterile walls of the courthouse, something bigger was happening. The courtroom wasn't the only place Danielle's fight was being witnessed. The real battle was just beginning. By the time Danielle's lawyer, Matt Listister, had finished his closing remarks, the first video had already made its way onto TikTok. It was only a few seconds long, but those few seconds, Danielle standing tall, her voice calm but powerful, her scrubs still stained with blood, were enough to ignite a spark. In just hours, the story spread. The media picked it up like wildfire. Headlines appeared across the nation. Nurse scolded for wearing scrubs in court. Her response makes the room stand and clap. For Danielle, sitting in the courtroom, completely unaware of the viral storm she had just unleashed, the focus remained entirely on her children. The judge might have passed judgment on her attire, but Danielle wasn't there to prove anyone wrong. She was there to keep her family together, to protect her kids, and to show them that she would never back down. As the case continued, the courthouse began to fill with more people. People who had been following the story from afar, people who had heard her words and couldn't let go. The gallery had grown crowded, packed with onlookers, reporters, and even other nurses who had come to stand in solidarity with her. It was in this moment that Danielle truly felt the weight of her actions. She wasn't just standing up for her children anymore. She was standing for something bigger. Tina, her neighbor, was in the crowd now, too, leaning forward, watching with intensity. She had been quietly praying for Danielle throughout the entire hearing, hoping that her friend would be recognized for the strength that she always showed behind closed doors. And yet, as Danielle's defense gained traction online, Tina couldn't help but feel a mix of pride and concern. This is the moment, Tina thought, eyes glued to the proceedings. This is what Danielle deserves. But is it too late? The viral sensation surrounding Danielle's story reached its peak after lunchtime. By 2 p.m., the hashtag Martin Leatherwear Scrubs was trending worldwide. Celebrities tweeted their support. Nurses from across the country joined the movement, expressing their gratitude for Danielle's bravery. The overwhelming support, however, only added pressure. Danielle had never sought attention. She had never craved the limelight. She had only hoped to be seen as a mother who would do anything for her children. But now, the world was watching. Back in the courtroom, as Judge Barron prepared to issue her verdict, there was a palpable shift in the air. The dynamics of the case had changed. The focus was no longer just on Danielle's attire. It had shifted to something much more significant. The battle for her children's custody was now intertwined with the larger question of respect for the sacrifices made by frontline workers. What have I done? Danielle thought, as she caught a glimpse of the chaos unfolding outside the courtroom. This isn't why I came here. I just wanted to protect them. Her hands, still marked by the aftermath of her night shift, gripped the edge of the table. As her heart raced, she could feel her pulse in her throat, the weight of every eye on her, but she stayed rooted in her resolve. I didn't do this for me. I did it for them. Then, in a moment that would change everything, Danielle's lawyer turned to the judge. His voice rang out clear, but it was not the words he spoke that carried the most weight. It was the timing. We request to call a witness, Your Honor. Add away. That moment, the gallery shifted. People leaned in as if they had just heard a thunderclap. And then, through the doors walked Dr. Leah Morales, Danielle's supervisor, her white coat sharp against the dim light of the courtroom. Dr. Morales was an unshakable presence in the ER. Known for her calm under pressure and her fierce loyalty, to her team she was exactly the person Danielle needed right now. But as she approached the stand, Danielle's stomach churned. She hadn't expected Dr. Morales to show up. The thought of her boss speaking in her defense, standing before the court to give weight to her character, felt like a dream, and yet, it was happening. Dr. Morales looked directly at Judge Barron, her posture commanding. There was no hesitation in her words. Danielle Hart is not only the nurse I trust to stabilize the most critical of patients, she's the one who stays when others leave. She's the one who works double shifts to ensure her patients have the care they need. She's the nurse who holds dying children's hands when their parents can't make it in time. The room seemed to exhale in unison. The weight of the truth, Danielle's truth, began to sink in. The judge, for the first time, looked as though she might understand. Dr. Morales continued, her voice steady and unwavering. If you think Miss Hart's choice of attire is disrespectful, then I suggest you spend a night in the ER. Watch what she does, how she performs, and how she gives everything she has to save lives. But don't you dare judge her for the uniform she wears. That uniform is a badge of honor, not something to be belittled. The courtroom was silent, the truth of Dr. Morales' words settling heavily in the air. But the most powerful moment came next. Dr. Morales handed a folded note to the court clerk, a note from the parents of the young boy Danielle had saved that very morning. They had heard about the custody hearing and wanted to show their support. The note read, "If Danielle Hart hadn't stayed past her shift, our son wouldn't be alive. She deserves her children. Please give them back." A few gasps echoed through the gallery. There, in the cold, sterile setting of the courtroom, in front of a judge who had once scorned her, Danielle's humanity, and the humanity of the people who loved her, became undeniable. But the tension wasn't over. What will the judge do now? Tina thought, eyes wide. Would the public pressure and overwhelming truth of Danielle's character change the course of this case? Would the court recognize the value of what Danielle had sacrificed, or would they remain trapped in the world of rules and appearances? And so the courtroom waited, as the gavel loomed closer, its final descent hanging in the air like the slow, steady countdown to an explosion. The silence in the courtroom was suffocating, and for a moment it felt as though time itself had come to a standstill. The weight of everything that had transpired, Danielle's sacrifice, her unflinching stand, the unwavering support of her colleagues hung heavily in the air. Even Judge Barron, who had once scorned Danielle for her scrubs, now seemed to hesitate, caught in a moment of reflection. The once ironclad walls of her authority were beginning to crack under the weight of the truth that had just been laid bare before her. Danielle sat there, exhausted but resolute, her heart racing, her palms still sweaty, though she wasn't sure whether it was from the intensity of the courtroom or the exhaustion from the 12-hour shift that had led her here. She wasn't expecting to win in the way most people might. All she had wanted, all she had fought for, was to be seen as she truly was. Not a mother who had her priorities out of order, but one who was doing everything in her power to keep her family together. She wasn't seeking validation for her work or her sacrifices. But now, as the judge sat silently before her, it seemed that the entire room was forced to acknowledge the truth they could no longer ignore. And then, after what seemed like an eternity, Judge Barron spoke. "I have reviewed the case, the evidence, and the testimony, and after much consideration, I have come to a decision." Danielle's breath caught in her throat. Her children were everything to her, her reason for getting up every day, her reason for enduring the exhaustion and the pain. To lose them would be a fate worse than any she had faced before. The fear was palpable, but Danielle clung to the one thing she had learned through everything. She could only be true to herself. Judge Barron looked directly at Danielle, her voice surprisingly soft. "Miss Hart, you showed up for your children. When they needed you most, you fought for them. You saved lives, you gave of yourself in ways that are immeasurable. And while I once believed that appearances were everything in this courtroom, I see now that what matters most is what a person does, what they give to the world, to their loved ones, even when no one is looking." A wave of relief crashed over Danielle like a sudden, violent storm. She fought to keep her composure, her throat tight, but she was shaking with emotion. She had done it. She had kept her family together. Her children were hers. "Full custody of your children will remain with you, Miss Hart," Judge Barron declared. "There is no evidence to suggest that they would be better served elsewhere. You've demonstrated strength, sacrifice, and an unshakable love for your children. The court recognizes this." Tears pricked at Danielle's eyes, and she blinked them away quickly. She had been so afraid that the world wouldn't see the truth, that her sacrifices would be dismissed. But here, in this moment, it was all clear. She had fought the battle not for her own dignity, but for her children's future. And now that future had been secured. As the judge's gavel came down, signaling the end of the hearing, the courtroom erupted into applause. It wasn't a traditional standing ovation for a legal victory. No, this was something different. People, strangers, colleagues, even the opposing counsel, were standing in solidarity with Danielle, recognizing the weight of her struggle, the courage it had taken to show up, blood-stained scrubs and all. It wasn't just her victory. It was a collective acknowledgement of the sacrifices made by so many people who often went unseen, unheard, and unappreciated. Tina, Danielle's neighbor, was one of the first to stand, her eyes bright with pride. She had watched Danielle through the years. She had seen her fight quietly for her family, for her community, for the people she loved. But today, she saw her friend step into something bigger, a symbol of all those who give tirelessly without asking for anything in return. And she couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude. As the applause echoed through the courtroom, Danielle stood, slowly, not with the triumphant energy of someone who had just won a battle, but with a quiet, almost reverent sense of relief. She had shown up, she had fought, and she had been seen. The years of sacrifice, the late nights, the exhaustion, it had all led to this moment. But it wasn't about the applause. It wasn't about the viral video or the national news coverage. It was about what happened in that courtroom, the recognition of something real and true, strength that came from vulnerability, sacrifice that came without hesitation, love that never gave up. As she walked out of the courtroom, the weight of the world felt just a little bit lighter. She knew the road ahead would be hard. There would be more sleepless nights, more hospital shifts, more battles to fight. But now, she knew she wasn't fighting alone. She had the support of her community, the love of her children, and the respect of a world that had seen her for who she truly was. And as she walked down the courthouse steps, hand in hand with her children, the world was watching. But this time, it wasn't just the story of a nurse in scrubs. It was the story of a mother, a fighter, a woman who didn't just survive, but showed the world what true strength looked like. And in that moment, Danielle knew something that would stay with her forever. Being seen for who you really are is the greatest victory of all. As the sun set that evening, casting a warm glow across the city, Danielle smiled softly at her children. They had won, and together they would face whatever came next with love, resilience, and strength. Because in this world, showing up for each other, that's what truly mattered.